Hey everybody, it's Rowan Dredge here, and in just a minute I'll be joined by my business partner and co-host Mike Hardy. We really enjoyed both the live and offline feedback from our last masterclass, and so we wanted to today follow it up with what we're calling our Hard Conversations Masterclass. And this is something that I think is a really vitally important, because as we talk with organizations and leaders and teams all over the APAC region, what they tell us, and they either tell us because they don't tell us, they tell us because we see the consequences of it, or they tell us because they lean right into the fact that there's some conflict going on, or people are mishearing and misunderstanding and being misrepresented as well. People are not being purposeful and intentional enough about how to have the hard conversations. And I am really keen to see you skilled up in this area. Now, I want to bring my business partner and friend Mike into the show. G'day, mate. How you going?
Yeah, doing really well. Good to have this conversation today.
Yeah, it's really great. Now, for those that are watching live or afterwards, who have just been informed by message through the platform that LinkedIn is having some challenges right now, which is a bit of a challenge, because I love the whole idea of LinkedIn Live. So if that's the streaming methodology that you're using, I'm apologizing for that in advance. You can see us on Facebook and YouTube as well. Mike, the hard conversations, real quick, like what's your experience of it? What have you seen? What have you noticed? And what would you lean into leaders on this with and for?
Yeah, well, here's what we know from our work, and then also what I've experienced in my own life. And that is that most people don't like having tough conversations, especially conversations that relate to conflict or tension, or bringing up issues with, perhaps it's their boss, perhaps it's someone that works for them, or maybe a team member that they've got some challenge with. It's much easier to have that conversation with somebody else. But a lot of the time, that's because we haven't been equipped with some tools that can help us have those tough conversations and know how to do it in a way that someone leaves the conversation feeling empowered and encouraged, possibly also challenged, but without a further blow up. And there's no promises, as we can't control how somebody else responds to something, but every single day we see and we work with organizations where there is all this other discussion that's going on, and it's not happening with the right people because we don't know how to have these tough conversations. So that's what we're going to be chatting about today.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And with that in mind, again, we're privileged to welcome you to the Masterclass Live. We know these things serve people at particular times and environments. And we want to thank our community, not just in APAC, but around the world as well. Why, I guess, to start off with, I guess what we're trying to talk about is, why does something like this matter? And I think that it matters because when you're in a team, and when you're a leader, when you're part of a team, when you're leading an organization, friction is frustrating. It costs you time, it costs relational equity, it costs productivity, it costs a lot of things. And our objective is to give you, just like last time, we gave you one self-awareness model. We want to give you one communication tool that actually helps you go into the hard conversations with even more confidence that you've ever had before. And this idea of friction can be very, very costly, because people don't know how to go into the hard conversations. They don't know how to have the hard conversations, and they don't know what to do on the other side of the hard conversations. They don't know how to have the "are we okay with each other" conversations, which, as we speak, I had to have with one of my best mates last week, because I had done something wrong as well. So these things are real, they're live, and they're very, very important. I think the second reason that something like this matters is because we've got to acknowledge that it's hard to do, but it's good to do. And with that in mind, it's really, really important to understand that peace isn't the absence of conflict. Peace is the ability to resolve conflict well. And that's very important. And if you've had this experience as a leader, you've navigated this in your team, then you would know what Mike and I are talking about when it comes to this idea of being able to resolve conflict well. And I think this is not a natural state for us as leaders. It's not a natural state for us as humans. But on the other side of it being handled well, on the other side of it being handled with psychological safety, on the other side of it being handled with integrity and dignity when it comes to the people in our team and the work that we're doing together, your team benefits, your leadership benefits, and you become more robust and more real in the process of handling the hard stuff. Lastly, I'll share something I learned from a mentor of mine, Matt Church, and he talked about this whole idea of state being better than script. And I know we want a script, and we'll actually give you some words to say before we finish this masterclass today. But what I want to do also is just install right at the start of this conversation that the way that you turn up, your intent, your state of mind becomes a very important part of how these conversations flow and go. And so the self-leadership, self-management piece is a very, very important part of this whole conversation. Now, we touched on this in our last live masterclass where we talked about the idea of self-awareness and self-leadership. And this is the tool that we use with our consulting partners, Giant, the Know Yourself to Lead Yourself tool. And what's really important is to understand that when it comes to the way you lead, when it comes to the conversations that you have with people, when it comes to the expectations and expectation management, you have tendencies and patterns that are a direct reflection of your wiring, of your DNA, of what we call your nature. And they are expressed through the work that we do, best expressed through this lens of the voices. So it's very important to understand that your tendencies and patterns will provide you with a natural response or a default response to the circumstances and people in your world. So are you naturally somebody that gives feedback without asking, unsolicited feedback? A colleague of mine and I call it, and we kind of laugh together because we both orientated that way. Or are you somebody that prefers to be a little bit more supportive and celebratory? What is your default system, and where do you need to learn and work on these things? Mike, people need to understand this lens through their leadership voice. What is it about that's really, really important from your perspective?
Yeah, well, as we say regularly, most people don't know what it's like to be on the other side of them. I didn't know for many years what's it like to be on the other side of me. I can't even completely and objectively know what it's like to be on the other side of me. But the more I discover that, and the more I understand how are other people experiencing my communication, how are other people experiencing my behaviors, my ability to listen and understand, that changes everything. Because we know that 82% of team members don't feel valued, they don't feel understood, and they don't feel like they're being really heard. And so we have to close that gap. We've got to change that statistic, and we could do that when we better understand ourselves, when we know, okay, now that I know myself, now that I know some of my tendencies that I have, now that I know that I have a pattern of perhaps, jumping in on people mid-conversation out of my own excitement, which shuts them down, that actually is going to improve communication. It puts value on the other person, but it actually improves my own influence and ability to have good relationship and have trust with that person, because I'm becoming more self-aware. And self-awareness, all the great universities around the world are saying in leadership circles, self-awareness is one of the greatest gifts that we not only give ourselves, but that we give our teams. And so if you can have that, do the deep work, do the reflection work on self-reflecting and understanding what it's like to be on the other side of you, you're going to do a whole lot better. And this is why we talk about this particular tool that we call the 5 voices. And we're going to have we're going to put the link for this so that you can take the assessment. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And you can actually discover, using the language and the tool that we call the 5 voices, you can understand what's it like to be on the other side of you through what we call your voices. And when you do the assessment, it's going to give you a voice order. In other words, what's your first voice? What's the default way that you tend to communicate, that you behave, and the way that you see the world? Another way of thinking about that is your personality. You're more than your personality, and you're more than what your voice order is. But this is the way that you have learned to both survive and thrive in the world. This is the way that you've decided, okay, this is what helps me engage with the world. And so when you look at these 5 voices on the screen in the slide here, I'm going to unpack them for you in just a moment. But my first voice is a connector, okay? My second voice is creative, and my third voice is pioneer. Now, in order of that, those first 3 voices I very easily access, and that's how most people are experiencing me when I communicate or I engage with them in the world or in a team environment. My fourth voice is my most unaware voice. It's the one that I really have to do some work on understanding and valuing. And then my fifth voice is I'm kind of aware that I'm not great at this and I don't access it very regularly. Some other people, this is their first voice. And so I need to partner up with those people and learn from them. So my fourth and fifth voices are my growth areas. I need to pay attention to them. But then I also want to be really aware of what would it look like for me to make sure that my first voice is really healthy and that I'm growing and maturing and how I use that voice. So really quickly, let's unpack this a bit. The 5 voices is a metaphor that we use to talk about the voice volume or the force by which other people experience us. And so there's kind of a scale of that volume. So from quietest to loudest voice, we have the creative voice. We have the nurturer voice, and they are the champion of people, relational harmony, and values. Okay, they're often the most loved people on teams. And if you happen to have a leader who's first voice nurturer, I can almost guarantee you that people absolutely love them, know that they're very cared for by these people because they just love people. Okay, now, they're the quietest of the 5 voices, but they represent 43% of the population. So if you're not listening to a nurturer speak or what they're feeling and what they're thinking, then you're probably going to get yourself in some trouble as a leader. Very important. And each voice has an orientation that's either present orientated or future orientated. Okay, so 2 of the 5 voices are present and 3 are future orientated, and the nurturer is present orientated. The second voice, which is the next in the voice volume, is the creative voice, and they are the champion of future ideas, innovation, and organizational integrity. And they represent 9% of the population. And interestingly, they are not the smallest percentage in the population of these voices, but there's not that many of them. So you want to look after creative first voices if you have one on your team. And they are clearly future orientated. They think into the future, their brain is there, and they're trying to work out how to get there in their thinking and in their processes and their work. So that's the creative voice. The third voice is the guardian voice. You'll pretty much always hear a guardian because they love to ask their questions, and they're a little bit more comfortable discussing what they're thinking and they're feeling. And they are the champion of due diligence, resources, and efficient systems and processes. And they represent 30% of the population, okay? They are present orientated like the nurturer. And quite often you get nurturers and guardians are paired together in first and second voices. So you could be a nurturer guardian or a guardian nurturer. They often work together. Now, those first 3 voices represent 82% of the population. Okay, so if these next 2 voices aren't listening or paying attention to or creating space for these first 3 voices to share and to collaborate and to communicate, this is where you get the 82% that feel misunderstood and not heard or valued. And it's really important. Connectors, they are one of the louder voices, the second loudest voice, and that's my first voice. They're the champion of relational networks, collaboration, and effective communication. And they represent 11% of the population and very future orientated. And then last but definitely not least, we have the loudest of the 5 voices, which is the pioneer. And they're the champion of strategic vision. They are results focused and they love to solve problems, anyone's problems, any problem. They just love to get in there and do that. And they're actually the smallest percentage of the 5. They're 7% of the population. And they are also future orientated. Now, interestingly, the majority of leadership positions are often taken by first voice connectors and first voice pioneers. And it doesn't have to be that way. Any one of the 5 voices can lead. It's just that probably because of the confidence and the the voice volume, connectors and pioneers tend to get themselves into leadership positions. And so it's so important that all of us value and understand one another, and that connectors and pioneers in particular make room for the other voices to be able to contribute and really feel like they can be part of the team. And when you know this about yourself, this is where the know yourself to lead yourself component kicks in. The more aware you are of your personality, of what your leadership voice is, of how you lead and how you communicate and how you come across, the better you can identify the areas where you need to improve and grow. And you can keep working on those areas that are your strengths, that are like, hey, I'm good at this area. Let's make sure I'm doing this in a really healthy and dynamic way that's going to serve and benefit the other voices on my team. Okay, so that's a snapshot of the 5 voices. We'll give you a link and you can do that. And Ro's going to talk us through the next part of this. But actually, Ro, why don't you tell us what your voice order is?
Unrehearsed question right there, my friend. Yeah, well, look, I am a pioneer, connector, creative. I probably should have volunteered that right at the start as well. So similarly to Mike, he's we're all I'm future orientated voices, but we really notice also the difference between him being a first voice connector, always having a story to tell, me being a first voice pioneer, listening to his stories, and about, I don't know, half to 2/3 of the way through, I'm ready to move on. And he's ready to keep telling the story, because that narrative is very, very energizing. And the pioneer connector really means that my leadership style is actually about gathering people to get focused on getting the job done. That's really the essence of that. And it's very, very helpful for me. In fact, the longer that we do this, I find the present and future orientation to be a very helpful frame of reference, because I always think about the future, but the nurturers and the guardians always think about the present. And it isn't a natural place for me to be thinking about Monday next week or Wednesday next week. It's a natural place for me to be thinking 90 days, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, horizons and opportunities, and then moving very purposefully towards that. So I think the other thing I'd have to confess is that there's no doubt I'm a pioneer because of what triggers me. And we actually talk about the power of your voice, and each voice has what we call a weapon system. And the pioneer's trigger is perceived incompetence. And that is well and truly, typically when I share this with people, Mike just sits there and you see, like he's doing now, he's trying not to laugh, but that's a big one for me. And I realized that was because that was such a key trigger. I knew that I was very much a pioneer. When it comes to understanding your voice and tendency, what we actually want to suggest today as part of the big idea is that your best framework to have a hard conversation is through what we call the support challenge matrix. Again, part of the IP from our friends at Giant Worldwide. And it's very important to understand that we can kid ourselves a little bit on how good we think we are when it comes to supporting and challenging. But typically, what we're more likely to be doing is what we naturally do. So I naturally challenge. Mike, as a first voice connector, would naturally support with a good bit of challenge in behind it. But you would more often feel challenged by me and supported by Mike. It's very important to understand, and we see this as a very liberating truth, and that is that nobody naturally calibrates high support and high challenge. One of our mentors, Steve Cockram, teaches this absolutely brilliantly. You need to release yourself of the expectation that you have to be able to naturally calibrate high support and high challenge. For you, it's likely to be a learned skill in one way or the other. And how do we do it, and what does it look like? Well, when it comes to having a hard conversation, what you're looking to do is you're looking to have equal parts support, I'm for you, I hear you, I validate you, and challenge, which is, here's what needs to change. This is what's got to be different. Here are the adjustments that we need to be making in our team, our culture, our communication right now. And we use this matrix, this 2x2, which actually provides the opportunity to look at, well, firstly, what would my default position be? Now, knowing Pioneer, my default position is to challenge. A Guardian's default position is to challenge. A Connector's default position is to support. A Nurturer's default position is to support. A creative Connector's default position would be to support. A creative Pioneer's default would be to challenge. Now, these become really, really important because when you know your default position, the other side is a learned skill. And what we want to be able to help you with today in this masterclass is how to develop that skill. Mike.
So let's talk about the first combination here, which we call high challenge and low support in the bottom right-hand corner. If you are somebody that offers high challenge and you lean in that direction, but low support, so that's part of your tendency, the challenge is that you could be someone that dominates. And when you're someone that's experienced, and it doesn't mean that's your intention, it doesn't mean that that's what you're trying to do, but this is more about how are other people experiencing your leadership or the way that you communicate with them in a tough conversation. So what can happen as a result of this is that it creates a culture of fear and manipulation, because typically someone who leans into this category, they're all about high challenge, walks into a team meeting, walks into a performance review meeting, or goes and has a conversation with the staff member and says, hey, we need to fix this, or you need to fix this, or you need to sort this out, or that's not good enough. And they bring the challenge, and it might be appropriate to bring a challenge because maybe something needs to change. Maybe there needs to be growth. Maybe there needs to be a change of behavior. Perhaps the particular performance issue needs to get better. But the problem is the leader can sometimes walk away from that conversation, and what's experienced by the other person is fear, or they feel like they don't have a chance to respond, or they're not being resourced and supported to be able to actually make the change. And that's when it creates tension. And this is when then sometimes someone on the other side can then respond out of their own, voice order. They can get mad, they can get frustrated, they can get angry, and then you just end up in conflict. And that is not what we want. Okay. So if you lean towards high challenge and low support, you need to be aware that you may be dominating, even if you don't realize it, which creates a culture of fear and manipulation.
It's so important to understand that, particularly if you are unconsciously operating as a leader. So I think that's so super helpful, Mike. Thank you. The idea of being somebody who chooses to default towards high support but low challenge ends up with an environment where we call an environment that is protected, or the nature of your leadership style is you protect. These are the conversations that are had when you're maybe in an executive level team and someone on the exec team says, yes, but yes, but us, but our team is, and they claim that there's some sort of difference or differentiating factor around their team. Typically, they would be defaulting towards prioritizing the way their team functions, the way their team works, rather than playing full out on the Patrick Lencioni idea of the team you're in is more important than the team you lead. And this becomes very, very important because what happens is this leader then begins to unconsciously protect their team, do work for their team, and then whatever the experience that team gets, they begin to believe that that is their right as a team. So they don't have to do things at the highest level of quality that perhaps their position description expects them to do, or the culture of the organization, or the engagement with the client. And if they don't, the leader steps in and supports them, thinking they're doing the right thing, but they then learn that they can get away with that kind of culture and that kind of a behavioral expectation. And where this becomes really, really challenging is typically the leader runs out of runway and actually can explode on the team and say, I'm doing all these things for you. Don't you understand how hard I'm working on your behalf? But the team don't. And then they begin to mistrust you because you resent doing all their work, but you never talk to them about it because you rarely challenge their behavior. And this becomes really, really important when perhaps you learn that you're burning out, you're overworked, you're way too stressed, but you actually created the challenge and the problem. Now, this becomes a real challenge when either abdication or domination goes on for quite some time and teams just throw their hands up in the air and they really don't know what to do next. Mike.
So if you are someone that leans towards low challenge and low support, then the reality is that you're probably abdicating in your leadership role. And this creates a culture of apathy and low expectation. Now, we all have a tendency to go into one of these three directions because, as Rose said, no one naturally cultivates high support and high challenge. It's something you learn to do. Our personalities mean that we kind of lean into different phases. But what can happen is with some people, you could move into being a domination role or you could be a protector. But there may be times and seasons when you could be becoming an abdicator. We often see this with leaders when, for instance, there's a transition happening in their life and they're tired, they're exhausted. Maybe there's an external dynamic going on for them. There could be a sickness around them or in their own life. Maybe they're experiencing some kind of mental health challenge or whatever. And then as a result of that, they just can't bring their best to their work. And so their team is experiencing low challenge and low support, whereas perhaps in the past, they may have been in one of the other quadrants. So when you get this kind of abdicating that takes place, it really does have quite a significant impact on the team. And teams can often say that they feel like they're stuck or they're going nowhere or there's no excitement or energy. They feel like there's a lack of vision. And so, if that's happening or if you recognize that in yourself or in your organization, then you want to make sure that you or the leaders involved are not abdicating from their roles, which leads to the space that we want to most get ourselves into, Ro.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, mate. And it's this idea, and again, let me just reassure us all, nobody naturally calibrates high support and high challenge. It's actually something that we're all learning to do day in and day out. So again, it's very, very clear. I need to calibrate by increasing the skill sets around being more supportive and more validating when it comes to all of that. But what we're really looking to do with someone in this situation is we're looking to liberate them, where you've got the calibration of high support and high challenge. You're building a culture where it's robust and the conversations are firm and fair and kind, but not rude. It's the conversations that you see having in the Disney Plus documentary where it's talking about the making of Frozen 2. The robustness and the vulnerability and the commitment to the word that comes to mind is ruthless, but it feels too harsh. The front-footed, proactive, no holds barred honesty, but they all lean into it because everybody's cheering them on to be able to deliver this fabulous product a year out. And the documentary unpacks how the idea of liberation really works together and really works with the people in that environment. So to be a leader who liberates, you're seeing people be empowered. You're seeing opportunities be created. You've got a way and a language of being able to give direction, receive feedback, and understand what it is that you're really looking to make happen. And this key idea around liberation is very, very important. And we want to point it out to you because it's this idea where you're saying, are my people empowered? Are they liberated? Are they getting opportunities to grow, develop, be stretched, contribute in the context of their leadership? And this is a very, very important part of the conversation. So as we land over the next several minutes, the question I think then becomes is, well, how? And Mike is absolutely world-class at taking us through a way of helping people feel both supported and challenged. Mike.
Okay, so one of the things that we want to do, if you're going to have a tough conversation with someone, this could be in a performance review, it could be just a more informal conversation. Maybe it's just, just a passing conversation. You want to remember there's a dance between bringing high support and high challenge. It's a dynamic thing. And we often say that, like leadership is both a science and an art. You have to learn key principles, but you've really got to learn the art of when to add certain dynamics in your communication and when to pull back. And so we always recommend you've got to start with support. The person must know that you are fighting for their highest possible good, which is the way that we talk about that. Your role as a leader is to fight for the highest possible good of those that you're leading and that you're working with. And so if that's your heart intention, you begin with support so that they know that you are for them. And then once they know that and that foundation is there, then you can move to the challenge part of the conversation. I'm going to talk you through some questions, which is an example about how you would actually do this. Okay. So here are some of the questions, 12 useful questions that are important to ask. And you can use all of these. You could use it word for word, or you can take this, even grab a screenshot of it and actually just kind of have a bit of a go finding your own words to kind of match these. But here's some of the example that we use about how to actually do this. So you might start off a conversation, whether it's informal or a formal meeting with, from your perspective, what support do you need in your role right now? It's a support question. You're saying to them, I want to see you flourish and thrive in your role. What does support look like for you? And then we might follow up with another support question, which is, what would help you do your role more effectively? And you're getting the person to self-reflect on what they really need to feel like they can do their job really well. Then you might ask, what else? This is often a coaching question where we're trying to, dig down and find out, is there anything else that's going on? Because sometimes people don't say what they think and what they feel straight away. And you want to give them that chance. Because often, again, because people don't like confrontation or they're afraid of, whatever expectations, some people are even afraid to ask for what they actually really want. So we're trying to give them that chance. And then we're going to move towards the challenge dynamic, where we'll ask a question like, and it's a question to get them to self-reflect. So before we bring our challenge to them, our observation, we want them to do the self-reflection to give them that chance to actually express maybe what they've been thinking about. And so we ask them, what specific areas do you see you need to grow in? And then this is their chance to say, I think I could, write my emails a little clearer. I think I could be a bit quicker on getting onto tasks that I say I'm going to do. And you say, great. And then you might follow that up with, is there anything else? And then they might say, and they're kind of thinking, yeah, actually, I probably need to get a little bit better at having tough conversations, or, expressing how I feel in a meeting, because often I sit back and don't say anything. And at that moment, we're going to say, hey, how can I help you with that? Or what do you think could help you do that? And so you can see this dance between support and challenge. We want this to be empowering so that they walk away knowing that we're fighting for their highest possible good. And then we move to our challenge, which is once they've shared everything from their perspective, we then say, hey, if they haven't brought it up, we say, can I just share an observation or some observations where I think it could help you really get to where you want to be as a leader or as a team member? And then we share that. And then we might move to, can I offer some feedback around a pattern that I'm seeing? You remember earlier on in the conversation, we were talking about know yourself to lead yourself, and you've got to understand your tendencies and the patterns of behavior that you have. Well, this is a chance for us as a leader to say, hey, there's a pattern of behavior here, and let's chat about that. Can you see that? Can I offer some feedback around that? And then what specifically needs to be done differently or to be changed here? So you're getting them to think about, what do I need to do that's going to get a different result? Again, it's a challenge question. And then we swing back to support, which is, hey, how can I support you in this? And then we might move back to challenge. How aware are you of your natural response in this particular situation? You may have observed the way they responded in a meeting, and you may want to bring them their attention to that, because most of us don't really know how we come across to other people. And even when you do this work every single day, you can still never be completely aware. And so this is why we need wise guides and leaders in our lives to help show us that we know are fighting for our highest possible good. Another example would be of challenge. What would it look like for this to no longer be an issue or a problem or a challenge for you? Again, helping them take responsibility for the change that needs to take place. And then again, finishing with a support question. Is there anything else that you need? You might say, is there anything else I can do for you? And that way, that when they walk away from that conversation, they're walking away feeling like, wow, okay, I got some stuff to grow in. I got some stuff to improve in here, but I know that my boss or my team leader is fighting for my highest possible good, and they are willing to do whatever is within their power to help me succeed. And when we get these kind of dynamics, it really changes the way that we do development with our teams. And it's pretty powerful. It's pretty amazing when we do that.
It's so helpful, Mike. And I enjoy listening to you teach and train people on this so usefully. And so that in a way is a script. So Mike, just riffing with you at the moment, we leaders who do this effectively and leaders who do it ineffectively, what's the payoff and the consequence here? What are you seeing? What are you noticing in teams at the moment? The hybrid environment, the return to office, what's going on right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been working with a lot of organizations who have been in a remote scenario where lots of staff are now working from home. And so one of the things that can happen is sometimes in our communication, whether it's email or even on Zoom, we can be very direct and we can be very much to the point because we're, a bit zoomed out or a bit tired. And so, as you often say, I think the people that are doing support and challenge really well are so conscious of the support dynamic. And as you often say, let's ask, how are you doing before what are you doing? Because it can be very easy. We can't see what everyone's doing. And we can jump in and go, hey, what have you been working on? How are you going with all that, those tasks that we set, rather than, hey, what's happening for you at the moment? Because there is a lot of challenges going on in a very complex world that we're in at the moment, and with so much change. And so that support dynamic that people know that we care is critically important. I think that's one of the biggest aspects. If people know that we care and we are for them, it's amazing how much they will look over when we don't necessarily do challenge brilliantly or perfectly, because they fundamentally know, even if we ask an awkward question, I know they care about me. And I think that's what we're seeing. People that are doing that really well, that's what they're doing at the moment.
Yeah, it's and that knock-on effect of a team feeling like they're not heard, a team feeling like they're not being taken seriously, all these sorts of things can be very, very costly in the development of your culture, in the overall performance, delivery to metrics. All of these things really matter. And then really gauging how people are feeling running into the end of the year, understanding what return to office might be. All these things become important. And the support challenge matrix helps you do that in any context. This works anywhere. We absolutely know that it does. It works at home, it works at work, it works with high end, it works with day-to-day, all these other things. So we want to be able to land this. We run a number of different programs that help people understand these tools, help them roll out. And what we'd love for you, if you're watching this live or getting value from it afterwards, then we would love you to get in contact with us and talk to us about our programs. We run a transforming team communication program. We've got a 100x leader, which helps you be 100% healthy with the ability to multiply. We also run cohorts where we combine those two things for leaders, teams, and organizations. We can scale up to really big, and we can scale down to one-on-one. And if that's you and there's interest there, get in touch, book a call to have a conversation about your needs and our fit. Or tell someone that you know about what we're doing, and we would really appreciate that as well. But obviously, we want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And we know that if you're just that little bit better at having the hard conversations, there are a lot of people that will thank you. So we do appreciate it. We do thank you for your time and for your attention, and we'll look forward to you closing out the year well and having a brilliant start to next year.